I was taking my usual route, crossing Interstate 40, in the middle of the night. The clock showed something close to 2 in the morning. I was tired, but the road was smooth, as always. It's strange, but over the years, the solitude of the roads at night ends up becoming a kind of comfort. Just the sound of the engine, the vibration of the truck and, of course, the radio playing something to pass the time. At first, everything seemed normal. However, I soon started to hear something strange. A muffled sound, coming from the cargo compartment. I thought it was just the movement of goods inside the truck, but it didn't take long for me to realize that the noise was becoming more insistent, almost as if something was banging against the walls of the truck. At first, I still thought it was just in my head or some normal traveling noise, but when the pounding started to get stronger and more regular, my stomach turned. I tensed, feeling something strange in the air. The kind of tension you feel when you know something isn't right, but you can't put your finger on it. I sped up a little more, trying to ignore the noise. It's just the wind, that must be it, I said to myself. But the sound didn't stop. The feeling of discomfort only increased, and I felt a shiver run down my spine each time the sound was repeated. It was as if someone was trying to get out of the cargo. It didn't make sense. I looked in the rearview mirror, but saw nothing but the distant shadows of the road. When the noise intensified again, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to stop at the next gas station to see what was going on. I didn't want to stop, but I knew I needed to. The station was deserted, a dim light flickering in the distance. I parked the truck next to a small building. I looked into the cargo hold, wondering what the problem could be. Everything seemed in order outside, but I knew the noise wasn't normal. When I opened the back door, there was absolute silence. Nothing. There was no one or anything to explain the sounds I had heard. The cargo was intact, nothing seemed out of place. But there was something strange in the air, as if something had moved inside, even though I had locked everything properly before starting the trip. I took a quick look at the load, trying to understand what was going on. But honestly, I didn't have an explanation for that sound. The feeling of discomfort was becoming unbearable, as if someone was watching me. What worried me most was that, even with the door open and the load visible, the noise seemed to have stopped out of nowhere. I stayed there for a while, with the door open, just listening to the wind and the absolute silence. Nothing strange happened while I was standing there, but fear still kept me on alert. I decided to continue the trip, still feeling like something was wrong. With each kilometer, I became more apprehensive, but I tried to concentrate on the road. The noise didn't return, but I couldn't get the idea out of my head that something had changed. I was beginning to doubt my sanity, but what I heard that night seemed too real to be just a hallucination. I was heading to Albuquerque, and the clock said almost 4 a.m. I was already exhausted, but I knew I couldn't stop again. I just wanted to get to my destination and unload quickly. The other day, when I finally arrived at my destination, I unloaded the truck, but the feeling of discomfort only increased. When I went to check the charge, I noticed something I couldn't understand. It looked like someone had tampered with every item in the cargo. The position of the boxes, the labels, even the way they were stacked, everything was different from the way I had loaded them. I knew it hadn't stopped anywhere since the last time I checked, and the cargo had been locked the entire time. My head was spinning trying to understand what was happening, but the answers just weren't coming. I ran my fingers over the boxes, trying to identify any flaws, but it seemed like everything was there, but it wasn't. As if someone had entered the truck, moved every item, and then left without leaving a single trace. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone had broken into the compartment. Everything was perfect on the outside, but the change was evident to anyone who looked closely. My body felt cold, and I didn't know if I should tell someone or just let it go. But, at that point, I already knew that something very wrong had happened. I stood there for a while, looking at that load. Nothing seemed to make sense. I went back several times to look more closely, trying to find any sign that someone had tampered with things while I was sleeping or driving. But the worst of it was that I couldn't prove anything. Everything was locked, and the cargo seemed intact, but there was something wrong. Something I couldn't even explain properly. It was as if that noise, those knocks on the walls of the truck, had been made by some presence that I couldn't see, but I knew was there, watching me the entire time. I still tried to convince myself that it was just a strange episode, that I was imagining things because of tiredness or the loneliness of the road. But as the day went on, the feeling that something had happened continued to haunt me. And the strangest thing of all, there was no more noise after that night. Nothing. Silence settled in definitively, as if everything that had happened had disappeared. As if it weren't important. I tried to forget, to move on, but whenever I was alone on the road, the fear would come back. Not because of the presence, but because of the feeling that I would never know what really happened that night. I never told anyone this. Who would believe it? I knew that if I told it, everyone would think I was just exaggerating or making up some bizarre story to make myself stand out. So I kept everything to myself, living with that lonely nightmare on the roads. The only thing I have left is the fear that something, or someone, is still out there, following me, waiting for the right moment to return. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I look in the rearview mirror, and for a second, I feel like that noise is going to come back. But, to this day, I have never been able to understand what really happened. The only thing I know is that since that night, the road has never been the same for me. I was driving alone on that deserted road. The silence was so profound that the sound of the engine seemed to echo throughout the vastness of the night. It was after 3 a.m., and I was almost at the end of my shift, fatigue weighing down my eyes. The road was deserted, with no signs of life for miles, except for a few scattered trees and low bushes on the side. I was in that rural area, far from any big city, when something caught my eye. I saw a figure moving quickly through the vegetation to my left. At first, I thought it was some animal, a deer or something. But as I got closer, I realized that it wasn't in the shape of any animal I'd ever seen. It was something large, with a strange and disproportionate silhouette, moving nimbly between the trees. The eyes glowed eerily, reflecting the light from the truck's headlights. My heart beat faster, a shiver went up my spine. I stopped the truck, still trying to understand what was happening. The animal, if I can call it an animal, didn't seem afraid of me. He simply stood there, watching, the distance between us never decreasing. The creature had dark skin, almost black, but with a skeletal texture, as if the bones were almost exposed. What disturbed me most were the eyes. They weren't just bright, they were like lighthouses, reflecting everything around them with an intensity that seemed to penetrate inside you. I felt a strange sensation, as if I were being watched, but not only that, as if I were the target of something that was studying me, that was curious and at the same time, threatening. I knew I should move on, but something kept me from taking my eyes off her. The creature remained there for a few seconds, and then, just like that, it started moving towards the truck. What happened next was even stranger. The creature, as if it had understood that I wasn't leaving, began to follow me. Not up close, but at a constant distance. It was as if she was watching me with every move I made, adjusting her position whenever I tried to speed up. I tensed, and a feeling of dread overcame me. I knew it wasn't a normal experience, but at the same time, I couldn't look away. I thought maybe I was going crazy, that the tiredness was affecting me in a bizarre way, but the reality of that situation haunted me. What happened next left me speechless. As I tried to speed up, hoping to fend off the creature and get out of there as quickly as possible, it did something I will never forget. In a quick and precise movement, she darted in front of the truck, crossing the road with an agility impossible for any known animal. The sound of the tires squeaking when you hit the brakes still echoes in my mind. The creature moved so quickly that for a moment, I thought I was seeing something. I couldn't understand how something so big could move like that, so fast, without making any noise, without leaving a trace of its presence. It disappeared into the vegetation abruptly, disappearing from my vision in a matter of seconds, as if it had never existed. I stood still, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to process what had happened. It all seemed so surreal, but I knew I had seen something real. I looked ahead, to where the creature had disappeared, and all I found was the pitch-black trees and dense vegetation. I tried to speed up again, trying to shake off the feeling that something was following me, but my mind couldn't help but relive every detail. I decided to stop a little further along, on a safer stretch of road. The fear was still very strong, but curiosity also consumed me. He couldn't just ignore what he had seen. I needed to understand what that was. So I decided to go back and look for clues, even though I knew there was no guarantee of finding anything. I went back to the point where the creature had crossed the road and went into the vegetation, hoping to find marks, tracks, or any sign that could explain to me what I had witnessed. When I looked at the ground, I found something that made me freeze completely: deep, very large footprints, more like those of a wild animal, but at the same time, something very strange. The shape was irregular, the marks were too deep for a common animal and, to make matters worse, they seemed to make no sense. No footprints matched a known type of animal. There were no claw marks, like those of a predator, nor paw tracks that could help me identify the being I had seen. It was as if whatever that animal was, it had no shape or pattern whatsoever. And that, more than anything, terrified me. I stood there, looking at those deep footprints for longer than I should have, as if waiting for something to appear to explain to me what was happening. But nothing happened. Silence took over again, and the feeling of being watched didn't lessen. At that time, I already knew that I wasn't dealing with something common, but what scared me most was the fact that I couldn't think of an explanation. The footprints were unmistakable, but I knew that no animal of that size existed there. Those marks were completely out of place. And, as if the presence of the creature was still in the air, I felt a strong shiver on the back of my neck, as if something was watching me from some obscure point in the vegetation. I finally decided to go back to the truck, but fear accompanied me. Every movement I made seemed amplified by the darkness, and I couldn't help but look back as I walked to the vehicle. That moment was etched in my mind. No matter how much I tried to rationalize, the fear and strangeness of that night refused to go away. The most bizarre thing is that, after that meeting, nothing unusual happened. I followed my route, and the road became an ordinary landscape again. But inside, I knew something wasn't right. What I had seen was not normal. Once back on the road, I continued driving, trying not to think about the creature or the footprints. But something still bothered me. The road seemed lonelier than ever. I looked in the rearview mirrors, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. The tension in my chest wouldn't go away. Everything seemed so normal, but my mind was full of that image, of the creature's glowing eyes, of the impossible-to-explain footprints. I knew that sooner or later that thought would take over me again. And as much as I tried to move on, a part of me knew that meeting wouldn't be something I could forget so easily. It's been a while since that night, and, to this day, I don't know what that was about. I tried to look for some explanation, but I never found anything that resembled what I saw. I found nothing about strange creatures or local legends that could justify what happened. I passed that road many times afterwards, but I never saw that figure again. I never found those footprints again. And somehow the fact that it all ended so abruptly makes me even more uncomfortable. Sometimes, when I'm driving down those same roads at night, I look at the greenery and find myself hoping to see those glowing eyes again. But to this day, I don't know what that was. And you may never know. I was driving on that deserted road, one of those long, endless roads where loneliness is the only companion. The sky was dark, starless, and the silence was almost absolute, except for the constant sound of the truck's engine. It was late, maybe 2 a.m., and I was starting to feel the weight of fatigue, as always happens on overnight trips. But there was something strange in the air that night, an uncomfortable feeling, like someone was watching me. At first, I tried to ignore it, but the feeling grew, like a weight on my shoulders. That's when I saw something on the horizon, a small, white figure among the trees on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was some optical illusion, perhaps white clothing from someone who had gotten lost there. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a person. It was a floating, almost ethereal figure, shining in the distance. When I tried to get closer, I accelerated the truck, but the figure disappeared before I could get close. I stood there, standing in the middle of the road, staring into space, feeling a strange cold sensation running down my spine. I was being watched, and I didn't know by who or what. The feeling of being watched continued to grow. I looked around, trying to find something, anything that would explain what was happening. And then, suddenly, lights appeared in the distance. They weren't headlights from other vehicles, that much I knew. They were strange lights, with a strong, almost pulsating glow, that seemed to appear out of nowhere on the horizon, floating in the air, as if they were moving to surround me. Fear quickly spread through my body, but at the same time, something in me compelled me to investigate. I knew I shouldn't, but I went. I drove toward the lights, hoping to find some explanation for what was happening. But as soon as I tried to pull off the road to investigate, everything changed. The lights suddenly went out, and when I looked around, I realized I was no longer where I was before. The scenario had completely changed. The road, which had previously been empty and silent, was now covered in dense fog. The environment seemed distorted, as if time and space no longer made sense. I didn't recognize anything around. Fear turned to dread, and I knew something was very, very wrong. I stopped the truck, completely lost, trying to understand what was happening. I tried to reverse, but the road behind me just disappeared. There was no longer any sign of where I came from, nothing that could help me get back. The fog was so thick that I could barely see the truck's dashboard. I turned on the outside lights and headlight, but even with the reduced visibility, the scene in front of me seemed even stranger. It was no longer the deserted road I knew. Everything was distorted, and the sound of the engine seemed muffled, as if it were somewhere else. That's when I heard a sound. It was nothing concrete, just a distant echo, like a voice, but without words. I didn't know where it was coming from, but it was surrounding me, as if it were in my head. Dread began to turn into despair. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry. I looked ahead, trying to see beyond the fog, and that's when I realized I was no longer alone. On the side of the road, some shadowy figures were watching me, completely still. They were like human shadows, but with distorted and disproportionate shapes. His eyes, if they could be called eyes, shone in a peculiar way, reflecting the light from the truck's headlights. I tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. Even when I looked the other way, I knew they were still there, watching me. I tried to speed up, trying to find a way back, but the road always seemed to change, as if it were alive, changing as I moved. Every time I took a turn, the scenery in front of me transformed into something stranger and unrecognizable. It was as if the figures in the shadows were shaping the environment, creating a maze to trap me. I didn't know where to go, I just knew that the road, the place, everything there was consuming me. With each attempt to escape, more figures appeared. I could no longer count how many there were, but they all stood at a distance, watching me in silence, as if they were expecting something from me. I was completely paralyzed by confusion and fear. The worst thing was the feeling that no matter how hard I tried, would never go back to where I came from. Every move I made seemed to only move me further away from reality. The road I knew, the world I knew, it was all disappearing, turning into something I couldn't control. And deep down, I knew I wasn't in control of anything else. Desperation took over me when I realized that the road was closing in, as if it was swallowing me. The shadowy figures approached, but still kept their distance, as if they were waiting for me to do something. I tried once again to turn around, but every time I tried, the scenery changed again. Now, the road seemed to have no end, and the fog was getting thicker. I could no longer distinguish what was real and what was an illusion. Each turn seemed to take me to a new place, but at the same time it tied me deeper into that nightmare. When the figures began to slowly move, I almost couldn't react. One of them, the biggest of all, got a little closer, but still didn't make any aggressive moves. Their eyes shone with intensity, almost as if they were studying me. The feeling that something was about to happen, something inevitable, paralyzed me. I knew that, sooner or later, they would capture me. But when I finally decided to face the inevitable and get out of the truck, everything went silent. Suddenly, the fog began to slowly dissipate, and the scenery transformed. The road, the vegetation, the shadows, and the figures disappeared. What was left was an open and empty field, as if the road and everything that happened had been a dream. I was back to reality, but something inside me knew this wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't something I could just forget. I was there, but I didn't know how I got there or what really happened. To this day, I can't understand what happened that night. I found no other explanation for what I saw or felt. I followed my route, as if nothing had happened, but whenever I'm on a deserted road, sometimes, I feel a shiver run down my spine. As if, somehow, those figures were still watching me. And the feeling that, at any moment, I could be pulled back to that place, where the rules don't apply, haunts me. I don't know what that was like, but one thing is certain, the road was never the same for me. I was making a delivery on a remote road, far from any city or town. The sky was cloudy, and the wind seemed to cut through everything around, leaving a feeling of emptiness. I decided to make a quick stop, just to rest and stretch my legs. I had been on the road for hours, and my body was already asking for some rest. When I stopped, I noticed something strange. There was a truck parked a little ahead, apparently abandoned. It wasn't common to find other trucks there, so my curiosity was immediately piqued. I approached the vehicle, and everything seemed in perfect condition. The truck was clean, the lights were off, and the cab did not appear to have been tampered with. There was no sign of any accident or any other type of problem. The engine was off, but the vehicle appeared to be in perfect working order, as if the driver had just stopped for a moment and got out. But when I looked around, I didn't see anyone. No clue where the driver could be. The strange thing was that truck belonged to a coworker, someone I knew well. So, I decided to try to contact the company to find out what had happened, but my cell phone didn't work. The network was completely out of reach. I stayed there for a few minutes, trying to call again, but there was no sign of life, neither in my contacts nor on the road. The place was completely isolated. It was then that I began to investigate the truck more carefully. I opened the cabin door and, looking inside, I noticed something strange. A note was carefully placed on the driver's seat. I went over and picked up the piece of paper, which seemed to have been left on purpose, as if it had been waiting for me. The passage was short, but the message completely chilled me. It said, "I can't go back." It was my colleague's handwriting, but the words didn't make sense. Why would he have written that? What was going on there? Fear began to consume me, but I couldn't leave without understanding what had happened. I decided to investigate further. I looked around, trying to notice something, some detail that would explain the situation. That's when, suddenly, I felt it. The feeling that someone was watching me, from afar. I didn't know if it was my mind working too much or if there really was someone there, but the shiver down my spine wouldn't leave me alone. I looked into the woods to my left, but saw nothing. However, the feeling of being watched persisted, as if invisible eyes were watching me, waiting for something. I was far from any help, and the feeling of being alone in that immensity of nothingness began to swallow me. The feeling of being watched didn't go away. I tried to rationalize the situation, telling myself that it was just the fear of isolation taking over, but deep down, something told me that something was very wrong. I looked back into the bush, trying to find any movement, any sign of life, but all I saw was dense vegetation and absolute silence. The road, which once seemed like a peaceful refuge, now seemed like a maze of uncertainty. I knew I needed to get out of there, but at the same time, I felt trapped. Something was stopping me from just getting in my truck and driving away. I went to the back of the abandoned truck, where I found more signs that something was really out of place. The cargo was intact, but the doors were slightly open, as if someone had recently disturbed them. But there was nothing else visible to suggest a fight or any other type of incident. Just emptiness, silence, and that note with the incomplete message. For some reason, that message was still ringing in my head, as if I had missed some crucial detail. I can't go back. What did this mean? Why would my colleague have written something so enigmatic? I was starting to feel like I wasn't going to get out of there without finding out the truth. I decided to go back to the truck and try calling the company again, but again, nothing. The cell phone didn't work, and the truck's radio also had no signal. That's when I realized there was no sound. Not the sound of the wind, not the sound of animals, not the sound of the road. The silence was thick, more oppressive than anything else. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and that's when I heard a crack coming from the bush to my right. It wasn't a loud noise, but enough to make me freeze. Something, or someone, was approaching. I didn't know what to do, whether to wait there or try to escape. My body was in a state of alert, and the adrenaline began to take over. I looked into the bush again, but didn't see anything. The snap had been soft, almost as if it was an attempt to attract attention. But whose? What I couldn't understand was that no matter how much I tried to rationalize everything, a part of me knew something wasn't right. There was a presence, something invisible, that was crawling around the place, but that I couldn't see. I was completely alone, with no help, no signal, and I felt that I was not just being watched, but that something was waiting for me. The fear was palpable. Every movement I made seemed to amplify the feeling that something was approaching. I stood there, still, listening for any other sound, any clue that would tell me what was happening, but the silence was overwhelming. It was then that something even stranger happened. The truck, my own vehicle, began to make a soft noise, as if it were running inside. The engine, which had been completely dead before, was now making a low sound, almost as if someone was trying to start the truck. The air grew heavier, and the feeling of being watched intensified. I tried to ignore the sound and focused on finding a way out, but as I went around to the truck, I noticed a figure at the corner of the road, a dark, undefined figure, as if it were hiding among the trees. I couldn't clearly make out what it was, but the weight in my chest increased. The feeling that that presence wanted to surround me intensified, and I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. But with each attempt to escape, I felt like I was being pulled into that place, as if the road, time, and even space were closing in around me. Desperate, I went back into the truck, locking the doors and trying to start it. But for some reason the engine wouldn't start. The steering wheel seemed to move with difficulty, as if something was blocking my movement. I was trapped, not only in the truck, but also in that place, as if reality itself had distorted. I didn't know what was happening, but a part of me knew something really bad was about to happen. The surrounding bush seemed to come to life, moving as if something invisible was moving through the trees. At that moment, I realized that I was completely alone and that there was no turning back. The note I found in the truck, the feeling of being watched, the sound coming from the bush, all of this indicated that I was in some kind of limbo, outside the reality I knew. When I finally tried to start again, the truck started moving, but in the opposite direction of the road. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew that the fear was getting stronger and stronger. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I realized that the road, the bushes and even the truck were disappearing, leaving me in total darkness. There was no longer any sign of anything, not even myself. I was coming back from a long trip when I decided to stop at an isolated gas station in the middle of a deserted road. The kind of place that seems to have stopped in time, with that smell of fuel mixed with the mold and wear of the years. The station was almost empty, with no movement whatsoever, except for the sound of the wind cutting through the trees in the distance. The only light was from a small hanging lamp, which gave the room a yellowish tone. The place looked abandoned, but fuel was still available, so I decided to fill up. While I waited, I looked around the convenience store. It was dirty, the shelves were disorganized, and a feeling of abandonment hung in the air. That's when I saw a mirror, hanging on the wall. It was dusty, the glass had a layer of dirt that made it difficult to see. But something about that mirror caught my attention. Maybe it was the fact that he looked out of place in such a rundown post. I decided to get closer and, without thinking much, I looked at him. At first I thought it was no big deal, but instead of seeing my reflection, what appeared was something much more disturbing. In the mirror, instead of myself, I saw scenes taking place on the road around the gas station. They were not current scenes, but something from the past. I saw terrible accidents, bodies scattered across the road, blood and destruction. People down, people screaming, and a sense of death in the air. I saw those people, but I didn't recognize any of them. They were unknown figures, but I knew they were connected to that road. The feeling of dread was instantaneous, as if I had been transported to another time, or as if I was witnessing something that should remain buried. I couldn't look away, as if the mirror had trapped me there. With each look, more images emerged. I saw apparitions of missing people, those I had known were just legends of the road. And, as the reflex intensified, the anguish increased. I began to feel suffocated, as if the air around me was becoming denser, more charged. Startled, I took a step back, trying to shake off the feeling that that mirror was somehow showing me a past I wasn't supposed to see. And then, something even more sinister happened. As I walked away, the reflection continued, but now it seemed to follow me. My every movement was reflected distortedly, with more figures appearing, more unfamiliar faces. Panic began to overwhelm me. I tried to leave the station, get away from that thing, but I couldn't. Every time I took a step away from the mirror, it seemed to follow me. I looked at him, and saw the figures of the disappeared faces getting closer and closer, as if the mirror was absorbing me. Fear took over, and I just wanted to leave, get out of there as quickly as possible. But when I went to the door to leave, I realized that the reflection of myself was no longer in the mirror. In the place of my face, there was an even more disturbing scene, an accident about to happen, and I was in the middle of it. It was as if the mirror had anticipated the future. I saw the truck, my truck, collide with another vehicle, throwing it off the road. I saw the impact vividly, as if it were about to happen right there, right then. The shock was so real that I felt the pain, the tension in my body, as if the accident was happening to my own flesh. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. I looked outside, but the road was deserted, the view through the window was peaceful. However, inside the mirror, the tragedy was already unfolding. Desperately, I tried to look away, but the more I tried to ignore the reflection, the more it intensified. The images of the victims' faces, the accident scenes, everything seemed to overlap my vision, as if the mirror was becoming the only reality. I found myself trapped in that space, unable to escape. I felt like time was twisting, that the future and the past were mixing together inside the dusty surface, and I had no control over anything. The mirror was showing me a timeline I didn't want to be in, a place I didn't want to go. I knew I needed to get out of there, but there was a feeling, a pressure, as if the mirror had marked me in some way. When I finally, almost in panic, ran out of the gas station and into my truck, I was overcome by a feeling of relief. But even inside the cabin, I didn't feel safe. The mirror, as if it had followed me, now seemed to be present in my mind, reflecting those terrifying images. The reflection of the accident was still clear in my eyes, and the worst part, I felt as if it were really going to happen. It was no longer just a vision, but a sense of inevitability. I didn't know what to do or how to escape that fate. When I finally managed to start the truck, my mind was still far away, absorbed by the images in the mirror. I looked at the road ahead, but my vision was distorted with anguish. The scenes of the accident seemed to be replaying inside my head, and the fear that it would actually happen became almost unbearable. I knew I needed to push that thought away, but it was stuck in my mind like a shadow. The road in front of me seemed so normal, but the feeling that everything was about to fall apart didn't leave me alone. I accelerated the truck, trying to leave that post and that vision behind, but the reflection of the accident remained in my mind. It was as if I was in two places at the same time, on the real road and in those images that the mirror had shown me. I looked at the rearview mirrors, the side mirrors, but I saw nothing but the deserted road. I still felt like I was being watched, like the mirror had somehow transferred its influence to the real world. I tried to force my mind to focus, but the pressure was so strong that I felt suffocated. When the road stretched out in front of me, and I passed the spot where the accident in the mirror would happen, I felt relief. The reflection in the mirror, that imminent future, did not happen. At least not at that moment. But still, the feeling that something was coming did not disappear. I looked at the road once more, but instead of seeing a clear path, something seemed to have changed. The shadows on the sides of the road seemed thicker, as if they were stretching out further than before. I didn't know what it was, but I had a feeling something was about to reach me. To this day, I have never been able to understand what happened at that station. I don't know if that was a hallucination, a trick of the mind due to tiredness, or if there really was something supernatural in the mirror. What I know is that, no matter how much I tried to forget, the reflection of that accident never left my head. Every time I'm on the road, I wonder if I'll come across the mirror again, or those images of missing people, those tragedies I can't erase. I know that somehow the mirror showed me something that was beyond time, something no one should see. And now, whenever I look in a mirror, I ask myself, what else could it show me?